Welcome, horror fans and cinephiles, to Tales and Thrills. Tonight, we turn our attention to a film that arrived with big ambitions, loud legacy, and controversial baggage. Spiral, 2021, dissected in Dead Meat Podcast, episode 248. We're going to pull back the shadows, examine what works, what trips, and why this Saw chapter left many fans divided. Spiral emerges from the Saw universe not as a straight sequel, but as a twisted reinterpretation. It promises something fresh, new killers, new philosophy, and the same brutal moral games. Chris Rock takes center stage as Zeke Banks, a detective whose world becomes a maze of puzzles, bodies, and ethical decay. Samuel L. Jackson's Captain Angie Banks, his father, looms as a moral anchor. The film opens with promise, crime in the city, a rash of twisted murders that force its characters to confront corruption, guilt, and justice. But to understand what Spiral tries, and where it stumbles, we have to look at tone, structure, set pieces, and its relationship to the mythos. One of the biggest critiques raised in the Dead Meat Podcast is that Spiral feels like two competing movies. On one hand, a detective thriller about corruption. On the other, a Saw-style trap horror spectacle. Sometimes those gears mesh. Sometimes there's friction. The podcast's hosts begin by praising the cinematography. Gritty streets, neon rain, shadows hiding menace. There are moments of real dread. The first trap scenes deliver tension. The emergent threat of the killer who frames moral decay feels relevant. The puzzle boxes, the masked henchman, the twist reveal of the voice behind the mask, these are classic Saw tropes reassembled. Yet the film also ventures into territory that doesn't always land. Comedic relief that undercuts tension, characters whose arcs feel thin, and a sense that much of the plot is familiar, even predictable. One recurring point during the discussion is the theme of institutional corruption. Spiral doesn't shy from it. It tries to ask how deeply corrupt power systems can rot society, and whether revenge is a path to justice or simply perpetuation of violence. Chris Rock's Zeke Banks storyline, investigating internal affairs, the pressures of legacy, and doing right by a city that expects him to fail, these are compelling threads. But the film often sacrifices depth for spectacle. Then come the traps. Some land brilliantly, one involving a body in a car submerged in water, another with gruesome timing and clever mechanics. The tension in those scenes works because they're visceral. You feel the risk. But other trap scenes stretch plausibility or diminish impact by leaning too heavily into gore or shock. The film seems to struggle between creating suspense and chasing spectacle. In the podcast, James and Chelsea note that when Spiral restrains itself, it almost succeeds. When it unleashes, it becomes bombastic, losing the quiet dread that made earlier Saw entries terrifying. The villain voice, later revealed, becomes a focal point of critique. The podcast hosts note that Spiral tries to reinterpret the Jigsaw ideology, that pain, judgment, and seeing people suffer can be a catalyst for change. But here, the moral tone wobbles. Is the killer's mission justice? Is it vengeance? Or is it grandstanding? The voice behind it sometimes inspires fear, sometimes feels like a megaphone for anger without nuance. Fans on Reddit echo this. Some saying Spiral is mediocre Saw movie but a fun ride. Others arguing that because Jigsaw's original moral framing is strong, this version feels diluted. Reddit. Another narrative thread is the character work. Zeke Banks is sympathetic, trying to balance duty, guilt, and family. His relationship with Angie Banks adds emotional weight, but supporting characters fare less well. Some are archetypes, the corrupt police, the criminal underlings, the betrayed victims. There is not always enough space given to them to feel distinct. The podcast falters here, praising Chris Rock's presence, but lamenting that some personalities are thin, typical. The pacing is uneven. The first half builds well, setting mystery, tension, and character. The middle sags sometimes under the weight of exposition and attempts at social commentary. Then it kicks back into gear with trap set pieces and a climactic sequence that tries to tie everything together. But that tying together is both refreshing, for fans wanting surprises, and frustrating because some plot threads slacken or leave unanswered questions. Visually, Spiral succeeds more often than it fails. The set design, rain-slicked asphalt, dark alleys, gritty police precincts, they ground the horror in something real. Lighting is used well to hide threats. Sound design contributes. The dripping water, sudden mechanical noises, the masked whispers, they create tension. The podcast hosts often reference how much of what makes horror work is what's unsaid or unseen, and Spiral sometimes gets that right. Now let's talk themes and legacy. Spiral takes on legacy in a literal and metaphorical sense. The idea of legacy in Saw has always been complex. The Jigsaw killer's legacy, the survivors, the copycats. Here, Spiral attempts to pass the torch, to question whether someone outside the original killer's sphere can take up that mantle. There's also the commentary about modern policing, corruption, economic inequality, privilege. These are big topics. Spiral tries to engage. The podcast gives credit for ambition, even if it doesn't always follow through. Audience reaction has been mixed. On forums, many expressed disappointment that Spiral didn't feel scary enough or original enough. Others defend it. Chris Rock's performance, some smart trap designs, and occasional emotional moments are cited as redeeming. Dead Meat Podcast reflects these divides. Moments of strong praise, moments of frustration. One of the more interesting critiques is the film's predictability. Though many plot twists are supposed to surprise, longtime Saw fans often guessed outcomes. The voice reveal, the corruption twist, some of the trap locations, many saw them coming. The podcast points out that in horror, foreknowledge often blunts impact. But they also admit that some predictability is unavoidable in a legacy franchise. Finally, does Spiral refresh the Saw franchise? The podcast leans toward yes, in part. It doesn't fully replace original entries, but it charts a path forward. It tries to modernize, bringing in social issues, using recognizable actors from comedy and drama, updating aesthetics, but its reach is limited by what it borrows. Ultimately, it's a bridge, not a destination. So what is the verdict? Spiral is ambitious. It has moments of horror that catch you off guard. It has themes and visuals that are strong, but it also has structural issues, tonal inconsistency, occasional overuse of spectacle, underdevelopment in character arcs. It's a middle Saw movie, not bad, but not top tier. It's a worthy entry, especially if you come in ready for moral questions as much as jump scares. If you survived all that, the real value in Spiral, 2021, is in the conversation it sparks, not only about its value or flaws, but about what Saw means in 2025, legacy, morality, and horror's capacity to reflect society. And that is perhaps Spiral's strongest achievement, making us think, not just scream. If I were to give it a final rating, I'd land it around 7/10, for effort, innovation, and flashes of horror greatness. Until next episode, keep your lights low and your curiosity high, because sometimes the scariest things aren't in the traps, they're in how we judge them. Outro music, low hum, echo of chains, fade out.